"Choose now, me or that stupid kid," demanded the wealthy man's fiancée about his late sister's newborn baby. The man immediately knew what he had to do. Nicholas Anderson was the epitome of a successful man. From a young age, he had been groomed to take on the role of director at one of New York's most prestigious investment firms, Anderson Capital. His schedule was timed to perfection, every decision meticulously calculated to keep his place at the top of the corporate world. By his side, always flawless and radiant, was his fiancée, Victoria Blackwell, a woman many regarded as the jewel of high society. She was not only beautiful and elegant, but also ruthless when it came to protecting what she deemed hers. Together, Nicholas and Victoria were the perfect power couple: influence, wealth, and control. Their relationship had not blossomed from a passionate romance, but rather from an implicit agreement between two powerful families. The union consolidated the influence of both parties and maintained their reputations in the ruthless environment of elite circles. Victoria had always understood her role: to be the ideal companion, manage Nicholas's social life, and most importantly, ensure her fiancé never strayed from the path they had charted together. However, there was one thing she could never control: the memories of Megan Anderson, Nicholas's younger sister. Unlike her brother, Megan had always been a free spirit. She refused to follow the Anderson path of luxury and pretense, choosing instead to live a simple and quiet life as a teacher in a small town, far removed from the intrigues of New York. She was the only person who had ever managed to break through Nicholas's cold and calculated facade, and for that reason, Victoria saw her as a silent threat. Megan hadn't attended the last Christmas dinner or responded to the meticulously planned gala invitations Victoria had sent. She had become a ghost in Nicholas's life, a constant reminder of everything he had sacrificed in his pursuit of success and power. That day began like any other. Nicholas was in his office, reviewing financial reports and planning the next big investment for his most important clients. Everything was running with the usual calm efficiency until his secretary, Linda, walked in with a pale face and trembling hands. He looked up, frowning. Linda never interrupted, unless it was something truly urgent. "Mr. Anderson," she whispered, struggling to steady her voice, "I received a call from St. Joseph's General Hospital. Your sister, Megan. She's been in a car accident. She's in critical condition." The words echoed in his mind like a distant sound. Megan. Accident. Critical condition. The chaos those words unleashed inside him was immediate, but Nicholas concealed it behind a mask of professionalism. He stood up abruptly, his heart racing as he tried to process what he had just heard. Without saying a word, he grabbed his coat and left the office. In his haste, he barely noticed Linda's concerned expression as he rushed out of the building. The drive to the hospital was a blur of silence and desperation. He drove like an automaton, weaving through traffic with a blank mind, trying to remember the last time he had spoken to Megan. Was it last month, on her birthday? No. It had been over 6 months. A pang of guilt mixed with fear shot through him. Megan was the only real family he had left, and he, caught up in his world of business and parties, had neglected her. When he arrived at the hospital, the smell of disinfectant and the sound of heart monitors hit him like a wave of harsh reality. He approached the reception desk, speaking his sister's name in a voice that hardly sounded like his own. A nurse with a kind face guided him through the hallways, whispering words he didn't hear until they stopped in front of a door marked with a red number. The doctor came out, his expression grave. "Mr. Anderson, your sister suffered severe trauma in the accident. We did everything we could, but..." The rest of the words faded away as Nicholas struggled to comprehend what he was saying. Megan, his sister, the person who had always been there, who had given him the only spark of real joy in his childhood, was gone. He felt his world crumble around him. Megan was gone. There was no going back, no apologies, no postponed conversations. It was too much, too sudden. He stood there, unable to move, to think, to breathe. "There is something else," the doctor said softly, and Nicholas looked up, unable to imagine what could make this moment worse. "Your sister gave birth 2 weeks ago. There's a baby, a boy named Liam. He's stable in the neonatal unit." The words didn't make sense at first. A baby. Megan had a son. He was an uncle. A million questions flooded his mind, but none made it to his voice. Somehow, his feet carried him to the neonatal unit. As he looked through the glass, he saw a tiny, fragile being wrapped in a white blanket. The child was asleep, unaware of the tragedy that had just unfolded. Nicholas felt a lump in his throat. Megan was gone, but this baby, he was the last piece of her left in the world. Just then, he felt a cold hand rest on his shoulder. He turned to see Victoria standing beside him, her brow furrowed and her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at the baby with evident disapproval. "What are we going to do with him?" she asked, her icy tones slicing through the air like a knife. Nicholas didn't answer immediately. He didn't know what to do. His life, so carefully planned and controlled, had just collapsed. But before he could say anything, Victoria continued, her voice laced with impatience. "This is a problem, Nicholas. We can't just keep him. He doesn't fit into our plans. There are ways to deal with this. We can find a family to adopt him, someone who can take care of him. He's not our responsibility." The disgust and coldness in her voice made something inside Nicholas break. He looked at Victoria, at her disdainful eyes and contemptuous expression, and then back at the tiny baby. Liam stirred slightly in the incubator, oblivious to the monumental decision that was about to be made. "I can't do that," Nicholas whispered, barely recognizing his own voice. "What?" Victoria exclaimed in disbelief. "Nicholas, don't be ridiculous. Choose now." She leaned in closer, her fury twisting her perfect features. "Choose now. Me or that stupid child." The choice was instant. Nicholas realized a truth he had been avoiding for years. Victoria represented the shallow, empty world he had always despised, but had never been able to escape. Liam, on the other hand, was the only family he had left, the last trace of Megan. And there was nothing more important to him than that. "I choose him," he said firmly, without raising his voice. Victoria stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock. Then her face contorted into an expression of pure disdain. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You're choosing to ruin your life." But Nicholas didn't listen. He had made his decision. He didn't know how he would care for Liam or how he would handle everything that would come next. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going to leave his nephew alone in the world. As Victoria stormed off, he stayed, gazing at the tiny baby who was now his responsibility. "I'm here, Liam," he whispered, gently touching the glass that separated them. "I won't abandon you. Ever." And in that moment, Nicholas Anderson's life changed forever. Nicholas stepped into the mansion with little Liam wrapped in his arms, feeling the weight of responsibility like never before. The Anderson mansion, a symbol of power and wealth, loomed majestically with its grand windows and opulent marble facade. Every detail of the place had been meticulously designed to convey success and perfection. But as he crossed the threshold, the house that had once been his fortress felt immense and empty. It was as if the echo of his own footsteps reverberated with the coldness of a cathedral. He paused in the foyer, gazing at the spiral staircase and the walls adorned with expensive paintings he had collected over the years. Everything was in its place, each piece of art, each decorative object, everything except him. In his arms, Liam stirred slightly, his tiny hands peeking out from the edge of the blanket. The baby squirmed, and his soft cry broke the solemn silence of the mansion. Nicholas looked down at him, his heart racing. What was he going to do now? Victoria had left hours earlier after one final outburst of rage and veiled threats. "I hope you realize the mistake you're making," she had spat, her eyes burning with malice. "This child will bring you nothing but trouble. He'll destroy everything you've worked for." Her words still echoed in his mind. In a way, she was right. He had no idea how to be a father. His life was built on control, calculated decisions, and planning every step. But there was no way to plan for this. Megan was gone, and she had left him with this tiny being who depended entirely on him. Nicholas let out a long sigh, looking down at Liam, who was still crying softly. "It's okay, little one," he murmured, even though he had no idea how to comfort a baby. The child kept crying, his face reddening as tears welled up in his eyes. Nicholas felt a knot in his stomach. "What do you need? Are you hungry? Cold? What am I supposed to do?" Feeling a growing sense of panic, he made his way to the kitchen, where he found Mary, the mansion's housekeeper. The woman, with her kind face and quick hands, looked at him in surprise. She had never seen Nicholas so unraveled. "Mr. Anderson, what can I do for you?" she asked, glancing at the baby with curiosity and concern. "I don't know, Mary," Nicholas admitted hoarsely. "I don't know what to do." The admission of his own helplessness shocked him. He, who managed multi-million-dollar investments and made complex decisions every day, felt lost in front of a baby. Moved by his vulnerable expression, Mary took a deep breath and approached cautiously. "Maybe he needs a diaper change or some food. Would you like me to prepare a bottle?" Nicholas nodded awkwardly, watching as Mary moved swiftly, searching for the formula that had been sent from the hospital along with Liam. As he watched her prepare the milk, a thought crossed his mind. Would it always be like this? This constant feeling of not knowing what to do? Mary handed him the bottle, and with trembling hands, Nicholas tried to feed the tiny child. At first, Liam rejected the nipple, his cries intensifying. Nicholas felt desperation surge within him, but Mary stepped closer and with a patient smile showed him how to hold the bottle more steadily. Slowly, the baby began to suckle, and his cries turned into soft whimpers. "That's better, see?" Mary murmured softly, watching as the little one finally settled in Nicholas's arms. With each sip Liam took, Nicholas felt something inside him relax, even if just a little. But the relief was fleeting. After Liam finished the bottle and drifted off to sleep, Nicholas was left feeling more alone than ever. He had no idea what would come next. Parenthood wasn't something you could master overnight, and he couldn't just ask for Victoria's help or delegate this responsibility like a business issue. That same night, chaos descended on the house. Liam woke up at 2 in the morning, crying at the top of his lungs. Nicholas jumped out of bed, stumbling over his own feet as he rushed to the makeshift nursery he had set up for the baby, but no matter what he tried, nothing seemed to work. He changed the diaper, offered another bottle, rocked him awkwardly, but the crying only grew louder. "Please, little one. Please, please." Nicholas begged, feeling more helpless than ever. He stayed up all night, pacing the long hallways of the mansion with Liam in his arms, rocking him back and forth without success. His shoulders ached, his eyes burned with exhaustion, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something akin to real panic. He couldn't keep going like this. He had no idea what he was doing, and if things continued this way, he would break. By the time the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Nicholas knew he needed help. But who could he turn to? With a haggard face and dark circles under his eyes, Nicholas grabbed his phone and called Linda, his loyal secretary. He explained the situation, struggling to keep his voice steady, and Linda offered a suggestion that sounded sensible. "Why not hire a temporary nanny, Mr. Anderson? Someone experienced with newborns, just until you get settled. Perhaps..." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Maybe you could contact the nurse from the hospital, the one who helped you with all the paperwork." Sophie, right? Nicholas was silent for a moment. Sophie Collins. Yes, he remembered her. The young nurse with the gentle smile who had been there in the neonatal unit, who had spoken to him so patiently while he signed the documents to bring Liam home. Amidst the chaos of those days, Sophie had been the only warm and understanding presence he had felt. Without a second thought, he asked Linda to contact her. Hours later, Sophie arrived at the Anderson mansion. She wore a simple blue blouse and dark pants, but her face radiated a calmness and serenity, a sort of light that contrasted sharply with the imposing coldness of the house. Seeing her, Nicholas felt a wave of inexplicable relief. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "No problem at all," Sophie replied softly, her eyes immediately finding Liam, who slept in his crib, his little face still red from crying. "It looks like it's been a tough night." Nicholas let out a sigh, rubbing his eyes. Sophie moved closer to Liam with a tenderness that touched him, gently stroking his tiny head with her fingertips. The baby, as if sensing her presence, let out a soft sigh and relaxed. "He needs stability," she said, looking back at Nicholas. "And so do you. I can help, but I need you to trust me and be willing to learn." Nicholas nodded, feeling like he had no other option. For the first time in a long time, he was willing to set aside his pride and accept that he couldn't handle it all on his own. "Please, show me how to take care of him," he murmured, his voice laden with vulnerable sincerity. Sophie smiled, and it was as if the mansion's atmosphere changed instantly. With Sophie's presence, the chaos dissipated slightly, and a new sense of hope began to grow within Nicholas. Maybe, just maybe, they could do this together. Because although Megan was gone, he was determined that her son would not suffer from the lack of a warm and loving home. The first step of a long journey had just begun. Nicholas awoke early that morning. The first light of dawn filtered through the heavy curtains of the mansion, casting a golden glow on the foyer and cold marble hallways. But this time, something was different. Instead of the usual oppressive silence, a gentle murmur of voices broke the stillness. It was Sophie's voice, speaking in sweet and soothing whispers as she tried to comfort Liam. Almost without thinking, Nicholas left his room and descended the spiral staircase. As he approached the living room where Sophie and the baby spent most of their time, he paused in the doorway, watching them from a distance. Sophie was sitting in a rocking chair by a large window, cradling Liam in her arms. The baby, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, stared up at her intently, his big, curious eyes reflecting the morning light. Sophie rocked gently, murmuring calming words that Nicholas couldn't make out. Yet, what he did understand was the tranquility that emanated from them both. The simple image of Sophie and Liam together made something inside Nicholas soften. For the past few weeks, he had felt like his life was spinning out of control. The chaos, the confusion, and the guilt had overwhelmed him. But Sophie brought a kind of peace that he hadn't realized he needed. With every smile she gave the little one, with each gentle and caring gesture, it was as if she wrapped the entire space in a halo of serenity. He didn't want to interrupt them, but Sophie noticed him immediately. She looked up and smiled, a calm and understanding smile. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," she greeted him softly. "Please call me Nicholas," he replied, feeling strange at insisting on something so informal. Until that moment, hardly anyone had used his first name. It was a sign of closeness that he wasn't accustomed to allowing, but for some reason, he wanted Sophie to see him as a person, not just the director of a company or the owner of a mansion. Sophie nodded gently and turned her attention back to Liam, who continued to stare up at her with wide eyes. "I think Liam is adjusting well," she commented. "Although he still struggles to sleep without waking every few hours, every day is a small step forward." Nicholas stepped closer, stopping beside them, looking at the little one with a mix of curiosity and fear. How could this tiny being cause such a massive change in his life? Everything he had once thought was important now seemed insignificant compared to the fragility and well-being of this child. I want to learn to take better care of him, he confessed, the words coming out hesitantly. I can't let you do it all alone. Sophie looked at him softly, without a trace of judgment in her eyes. Of course, Nicholas. I'm here to help with whatever you need, but you have to remember that caring for a baby isn't about getting everything right the first time. It's about trying, being present, and not giving up. Nicholas watched as Sophie rocked Liam and suddenly felt an impulse. Carefully, he extended his arms. Can I hold him? Sophie looked surprised for a moment before smiling and nodding. Of course. With a gentleness he didn't know he possessed, Nicholas took Liam from Sophie's arms. The baby blinked, as if trying to recognize him. Nicholas felt his heart pounding as he looked into those eyes so much like his sister Megan's. Liam's fragility overwhelmed him. He was so small, so vulnerable, but also incredibly brave. Despite the tragedy of losing his mother and being taken from the safety of the hospital to a completely unfamiliar environment, Liam hadn't given up. Hello, little one, Nicholas murmured, cradling the baby awkwardly. Sophie watched with tenderness and took a small step back, allowing Nicholas to get used to holding the child. They stood in an almost reverent silence, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the garden outside. Nicholas felt as if time had stopped, as if it was just him and Liam in that moment. It was the first time he felt something akin to peace since Megan had passed. After a few minutes, the baby closed his eyes and, to Nicholas's surprise, fell asleep. He looked up at Sophie, searching for approval, and she gave him a warm smile. You're doing great, she whispered. Just keep going. Nicholas felt a strange sense of satisfaction hearing those words. It was a completely new sensation for him, so different from the accomplishments and victories he had achieved in the corporate world. This tiny moment, the simple act of putting his nephew to sleep, felt more valuable than any other success in his life. Why don't you take a break? Sophie suggested gently. I can stay with him. Nicholas shook his head. I want to stay with both of you. Sophie blinked, surprised by the confession. Then she nodded, settling into the chair next to him. Nicholas took a seat on the opposite sofa, holding Liam close to his chest. The baby breathed softly, his tiny body moving rhythmically with each breath. A wave of tenderness washed over Nicholas, so powerful he could barely comprehend it. The next few hours passed in a blur. Sophie began teaching him small things about caring for a baby. How to hold him so he wouldn't feel uncomfortable. How to interpret his cries and recognize when he was hungry or needed to be changed. Nicholas listened attentively, each little piece of advice etched into his mind as if they were precious secrets. And although he made mistakes, like nearly spilling powder all over the changing table, Sophie never looked at him with judgment or laughed. She simply guided him with patience, whispering words of encouragement and showing him how to correct his errors. Over time, the mansion began to change. What had once been a cold, lifeless place started to fill with the sounds of soft laughter and soothing whispers. Nicholas found himself looking forward to every moment he spent with Sophie and Liam, wanting to learn more, to be better. And as he immersed himself in his new reality, he began to see Sophie in a different light. She wasn't just the nurse who had come to help him with a temporary problem. She was a woman full of compassion and strength, someone who deeply cared for a child that wasn't hers. Every time he saw her smile at Liam or when she soothed him in the middle of the night, Nicholas felt something unfamiliar bloom inside him. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper, something he wasn't ready to admit. One afternoon, as they both watched Liam sleep in his crib, Sophie broke the silence. I know this isn't easy for you, Nicholas, she said softly, but I want you to know that you're doing well. Taking care of a baby isn't about perfection. It's about love and effort, and I see how much you care for him." Nicholas looked at her, feeling a lump form in his throat. No one had ever said that to him before. No one had acknowledged his efforts in that way. "Thank you, Sophie," he whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you here." Sophie lowered her gaze, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I'm just here to make sure Liam is okay, but—" She looked up, her eyes shining with an emotion Nicholas couldn't quite identify. "I'm glad to see that you're okay too." Nicholas didn't know what to say. The words stuck in his throat as he looked at her, feeling an inexplicable warmth spread through his chest. Because at that moment, he realized something fundamental. Sophie wasn't just taking care of Liam. She was taking care of him too. And for the first time, Nicholas Anderson felt that maybe, just maybe, he could become the man they both needed. The weeks that followed felt like a new beginning for Nicholas, Sophie, and little Liam. Slowly but surely, a routine settled into the Anderson mansion. Liam's desperate cries were replaced by tiny babbles and giggles, and Nicholas, to his own surprise, adapted to the role of a father with a mixture of clumsiness and devotion he never thought he had. Sophie was by his side every step of the way, teaching him, guiding him, and most importantly, giving him the confidence he needed to be the caregiver Liam deserved. During that time, Nicholas felt more alive than he had in years. However, that peace was not meant to last. One rainy afternoon, while Sophie was in the kitchen preparing dinner for Liam and Nicholas was in his study checking some emails, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. The butler rushed to greet the unexpected visitor. Nicholas stood up from his desk, his heart pounding. Since the day she had left, Victoria hadn't tried to contact him once. No calls, no messages. But there she was, standing in the entryway, soaked from the rain, with a look of determination on her face that made Nicholas's blood run cold. Victoria crossed the foyer with her head held high, as if she were the mistress of the house. She was dressed impeccably in a fitted black coat, and she dramatically removed her hat, letting her blonde hair cascade over her shoulders. Her green eyes locked onto Nicholas, scrutinizing him with the intensity of a predator sizing up its prey. Before he could say anything, she smiled coldly. "I came to see how you were doing," she said softly, her voice dripping with hidden venom. "I heard that the situation with that baby is still complicated." Nicholas felt his stomach churn. He knew Victoria wasn't there out of concern. She never did anything without a hidden agenda. But despite everything, a part of him still felt trapped by the history they shared, by the expectations their families had for them. "Victoria, why have you come back?" he asked, exhaustion clear in his voice. She took a step forward, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble. "Nicholas, I didn't come to fight. I've been thinking a lot, and I realized that I shouldn't have left like that. I was impulsive. I wasn't prepared for what happened." Her tone softened, and she lowered her gaze with an almost vulnerable expression that Nicholas knew was fake. "But I love you, Nicholas, and I'm willing to accept whatever is necessary to be by your side." Nicholas felt a tight knot form in his chest. Love? Was that really what Victoria felt? He searched her eyes for any trace of sincerity, but all he found was cold calculation. He knew that what Victoria truly cared about wasn't love, it was control. But before he could respond, a soft babble interrupted the tense moment. "Da-da," Liam's small voice echoed down the hallway. Both of them turned towards the sound. Sophie stood a few steps away, holding Liam in her arms. The baby reached out his tiny hands towards Nicholas with a beaming smile on his face. Sophie, looking tense, gazed warily at Victoria. The atmosphere thickened instantly, as if the very air had frozen. Victoria shot a glare at Sophie and then looked at the baby. For a brief moment, her expression of disgust was impossible to hide. But then she smiled with icy calmness. "Oh, look who's here," she murmured, stepping closer. Her eyes roved over Liam with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. So this is the little one who's been taking my place? Nicholas's heart raced. He stepped forward, instinctively positioning himself between Victoria and Sophie. Victoria, enough, he said firmly. He's my nephew, not your rival. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Rival? She repeated with a dry laugh. What makes you think I'd stoop so low as to compete with a baby? The tension in the room was palpable. Sophie held Liam closer to her chest, her stance protective and resolute. Nicholas felt a surge of protectiveness, something he had never experienced with such intensity before. It wasn't just for Liam, it was for Sophie as well. Victoria noticed immediately. Her gaze darkened as she saw how Nicholas positioned himself between her and the other woman. Ah, I see, she murmured, her voice low and as sharp as a knife. So, she hasn't just been taking care of the baby, has she? Her eyes bore into Sophie with pure malice. She's managed to manipulate you too. That's enough, Victoria, Nicholas interrupted, his voice carrying a warning that reverberated through the room. Sophie has nothing to do with this. If you came here to cause trouble, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. For a moment, it seemed like Victoria was going to explode. Her lips tightened and her face twisted with barely contained fury. But then, like a predator switching tactics, her expression softened. Fine, she said finally, raising her hands in a gesture of surrender. Maybe I overreacted. Just let me try again. She turned towards Sophie and Liam, forcing a strained smile. Hello there, little one. The condescending tone in her voice sent a shiver down Nicholas's spine. Liam, oblivious to the hostility, looked at Victoria curiously and then buried his face against Sophie's shoulder. The baby's instinctive reaction made something inside Nicholas snap. He had never put much stock in the idea that children could sense adults' intentions, but Liam was clearly uncomfortable, and that only confirmed what he already knew. Victoria had no place in his life or in his nephew's. Maybe, just maybe, I could try to adapt to this situation, Victoria said slowly, as if the words burned her throat. For you, Nicholas. Because I love you. Nicholas felt his stomach twist. The words sounded empty, hollow, and when he looked at Sophie, who was watching the scene unfold with a calm but wary expression, he knew he couldn't let Victoria back into their lives. She was a threat, not just to Liam, but to the fragile peace that Sophie had brought into his home. Thank you for coming, Victoria, he said firmly, but I think it's best for both of us to go our separate ways. The words left his mouth with a clarity that surprised even him. Liam is my priority now, and I won't let anything put him in danger, no matter what you say or do. For a moment, Victoria seemed stunned by the shock, but then her face hardened, her lips curling into a smile of pure hostility. This isn't over, Nicholas, she whispered coldly. I promise you, this isn't over. And without looking back, she turned on her heel and strode out of the house, her heels clicking ominously against the marble like a sinister echo. Nicholas stood there, breathing deeply as the weight of his words settled over him. He didn't know what Victoria would do next, but he did know one thing for certain. He would do anything to protect Liam and the life they were beginning to build with Sophie. He turned to Sophie, who still held the baby firmly, and their eyes met. Are you okay? She asked quietly. Yes, Nicholas replied, feeling a certainty sweep through him like a wave. Because now I know what I really want. And as he looked at Sophie and Liam, he knew he wouldn't let anything or anyone destroy the family they were starting to build together. The days following Victoria's unexpected visit were filled with tension. Though the Anderson mansion had regained its outward calm, the atmosphere was laced with an almost imperceptible sense of unease. Nicholas tried to maintain their routine, waking up early, helping Sophie care for Liam, and spending a few hours at the office handling business matters. but he couldn't shake the persistent feeling that Victoria was plotting something. Sophie, for her part, remained vigilant. She didn't trust Victoria, and although Nicholas had been firm about keeping her out of his life, something about the way she had left worried her deeply. However, Sophie chose not to mention it. Liam was beginning to settle into a more peaceful routine, and Nicholas seemed determined to continue learning how to be a good father. She didn't want anything to disrupt the progress they had made. But the calm was only a facade, and the storm Sophie feared arrived much sooner than expected. It was a sunny morning when the first blow struck. Nicholas was in his study, going over some financial documents, when Linda, his secretary, rushed in with a pale face and wide eyes. "Mr. Anderson," she said breathlessly, "I just received an urgent email that I think you need to see right away." Nicholas frowned, rarely seeing Linda so upset. Without a word, she handed him a manila folder. Inside was a background report, accompanied by a series of documents that appeared to be investigative evidence. His eyes widened as he read the name at the top of the file, Sophie Collins. A chill ran down his spine as he flipped through the pages. The documents claimed that Sophie had a history of unstable behavior, had been fired from several previous jobs for negligence, and, worst of all, had faced legal trouble for alleged child abuse at a hospital where she had been dismissed. Nicholas's heart pounded. He couldn't believe what he was reading. It was as if someone had rewritten everything he thought he knew about her. But the papers, filled with specific details and personal data, seemed so real. A mixture of anger and disbelief surged within him. How could this be possible? Could Sophie, the woman who had been so gentle with Liam, really be that kind of person? He shot up from his chair, sending it spinning backward. A blazing sense of betrayal and confusion burned inside him like a raging fire. He needed to talk to her. He needed answers. Without a second thought, he stormed out of his office and made his way across the mansion to the wing where Sophie spent most of her time with Liam. Sophie was sitting on the carpet in the living room, smiling as Liam took small, wobbly steps toward her. It was such a normal, happy scene, so full of life, that it made Nicholas's world crack even more to think it could be false. But when she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, the smile vanished from her face. "Nicholas, what's wrong?" she asked, noticing the darkness in his expression. Nicholas didn't respond immediately. He just stared at her with an expression Sophie had never seen before. Distrust. "What is this, Sophie?" he said finally, throwing the documents at her. She caught them instinctively, glancing at the header in confusion. But as she skimmed through the pages, her eyes widened and her face turned pale. It was as if the ground had crumbled beneath her feet. "This is a lie," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never... How is this possible?" Nicholas watched her with his fists clenched at his sides. "Is all of this fake?" he demanded, his voice harsh and cutting. "Have you been lying to me this whole time? Playing with us? With Liam?" Desperation filled Sophie's face. She let the documents fall from her hands and took a step toward him, shaking her head frantically. "No, Nicholas. None of this is true. I've never done anything they're accusing me of. Someone must have manipulated these records." Her voice cracked, but her eyes were full of pleading. "I would never lie to you. I would never hurt Liam." But Nicholas couldn't hear her. The doubts, the suspicions, the sense of betrayal, everything was swirling in his mind. He remembered Victoria's words, her insinuations, her suspicions that Sophie was only trying to replace her in his life, manipulating him to gain something. Could it be true? Could he have been so blind? "I don't know what to think," he said finally, his voice a strained whisper filled with anguish. Sophie's expression shifted from pleading to pain. She stepped back, as if his words had struck her physically. "Do you really believe I'm capable of doing something like that?" she asked, her voice a broken murmur. After everything we've been through, after everything I've tried to do for you and for Liam, do you really think I'm a threat?" Nicholas lowered his gaze, unable to meet her eyes, because deep down there was something in him that resisted believing it. Everything about Sophie told him she wasn't like that she was someone he could trust. But the documents, the evidence... Sophie took a deep breath, struggling to stay calm. She knew there was no point trying to reason with him at that moment. He was blinded by doubt. Her voice was a whisper, laden with dignity. "If you really believe I'm dangerous, then I have no reason to stay here," she said, her tone firm, even as her heart broke with every word. "I'll leave right away." Nicholas looked up, startled. "You're leaving?" Sophie nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "If that's what you think is necessary, if you don't trust me, I can't stay here. But please, Nicholas, remember who I really am. Remember everything I've done for Liam. I am not that person." Her voice wavered. "But if you want me to go, I will." Liam, who had been playing with his toys, sensed the tension and began to cry. Sophie instinctively turned to soothe him, but Nicholas stepped forward and blocked her. "Leave him. I'll take care of him." The way he moved her aside, as if he could no longer trust her to touch his nephew, was the final blow. Sophie felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. Gathering all the dignity she had left, she turned toward the door. "I'll pack my things and leave immediately," she said flatly, without meeting his eyes. Nicholas didn't respond. He watched her go, her back rigid and her shoulders tense, as if she was holding back the pain of being rejected in the only way she knew how. And as she disappeared from sight, Liam cried even louder, as if he knew something precious and irreplaceable was slipping away. Hours later, Sophie walked out of the mansion with her small suitcase, her face pale and her eyes hollow. Nicholas, watching her from the window of his study, felt a pang of guilt and despair like he had never known before. But he did nothing. He said nothing. He simply watched her leave. When the door closed behind her, a cry of anguish echoed through the house. Liam, in his crib, screamed in desperation. Nicholas rushed to him, but when he picked him up, the baby pushed him away, crying even harder. Nothing he did could console him. He spent the next few hours trying to calm him, rocking him back and forth, but the child only screamed louder, his cries filled with heartbreak. Nicholas finally collapsed into the armchair, exhausted, defeated. Liam continued crying, his face flushed and his tiny fists clenched. And at that moment, as he held the baby and felt Sophie's absence like an unbearable void, he understood. He had made a terrible mistake. He had let the lies blind him, let the doubts destroy something beautiful. But now it was too late. Sophie was gone, and with her, the only chance he had to give Liam a real family. Nicholas couldn't remember ever feeling such pain in his life. The house that had once been his refuge now felt empty, cold, and desolate. Without Sophie, every corner of the mansion seemed darker. The laughter and warmth that had started to bloom vanished like a mirage, leaving only a crushing silence and the heartbreaking cries of a child who didn't understand why the one person who had cared for him with true love had left. Liam cried day and night. He didn't want to eat, he didn't want to sleep, and he rejected every attempt Nicholas made to comfort him. Nicholas tried singing lullabies, offered him his bottle, even took him for car rides to see if the motion would soothe him. Nothing worked. Every time Nicholas looked at him, he felt the weight of his mistake. His heart twisted with every scream and every tear that ran down his nephew's cheeks. All he could think about was Sophie's words, "Remember who I really am." But the doubt Victoria had sown had blinded him, and now he was paying the price. A week after Sophie left, Nicholas reached his breaking point. He was in the mansion's living room, holding Liam in his arms, who was still crying. The baby's eyes were red and swollen, and his tiny body trembled from exhaustion. Nicholas, His shoulders slumped and his gaze empty, rocked him once more, murmuring desperate words that the child couldn't understand. "Please, little one," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, stop crying. I'm so sorry." But Liam wouldn't calm down. His cries echoed through the mansion, like a reflection of Nicholas's own torment. Then, in a moment of absolute desperation, he realized what he had to do. He couldn't keep going like this. He couldn't let Liam suffer any longer. He had to fix his mistake. With trembling hands, he grabbed his phone and called Thomas Murphy, a renowned private investigator he had worked with in the past. Murphy's voice was calm on the other end of the line, but Nicholas didn't have time for pleasantries. "I need you to find someone for me," he said, his voice shaky. "Sophie Collins. She should be in New York or somewhere close. And I need proof of who really caused what happened. There are documents saying terrible things about her, but I know they're not true. Find the truth, Thomas. Please." Thomas agreed to take the case, and over the following days, Nicholas waited in agony for news. Meanwhile, he tried to handle the chaos at home and at his company. Rumors about Sophie had started to spread. Someone had leaked the story to the press, and soon rumors of the manipulative nanny who had been dismissed from the Anderson mansion began circulating. The company's shareholders were concerned, fearing that the scandal would damage the firm's image. Partners began questioning his judgment, and the pressure increased with each passing day. But none of that mattered to Nicholas. Only one thing was important: finding Sophie and proving her innocence. Not for the company, not for himself, but for Liam. For what the boy had lost because of his mistakes. One morning, just as the sun began to illuminate the mansion's empty hallways, Thomas called. "I found her," he announced. Nicholas's heart raced. He could barely speak. "Where is she?" "In Brooklyn," Thomas replied. "She's working at a small community clinic. It looks like she returned to her roots. But that's not all, Nicholas. I dug deeper into those documents you received, and I discovered that all of them were fabricated. The source of the accusations is false, and the evidence used to defame her comes from someone with access to your private accounts and contacts." Nicholas felt the world come to a standstill. "Victoria?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "All signs point to her," Thomas confirmed. "She manipulated some people, bribed others, and created a false narrative to make you believe Sophie was dangerous. She planned it all from the beginning." Nicholas felt pain and guilt mix with an indescribable fury. Victoria. She had destroyed something precious just for the sake of control, and he, like a fool, had fallen right into her trap. "Thank you, Thomas," he said quietly, barely holding back his rage. "I'll handle this myself." That very afternoon, Nicholas got into his car and drove to Brooklyn. He didn't take his driver or tell anyone where he was going. It was just him and his determination to right the wrongs he had done. The community clinic where Sophie worked was small, modest, a worn brick building with a sign indicating its mission to help low-income families. Nicholas stopped in front of the door, his heart pounding in his throat. He found her there, standing behind the counter, dressed in a simple blue uniform, her hair tied back in a ponytail, her face tired but serene. She was speaking to a young mother holding a small child, and the contrast between this scene and the opulence of the Anderson mansion hit him like a blow. Sophie belonged here, surrounded by people who needed her, people who valued who she truly was. When she finished speaking with the mother and the woman left, Sophie looked up and saw him standing in the doorway. At first, surprise crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by an expression Nicholas had never seen before. Distance. Coldness. "What are you doing here, Nicholas?" she asked, her voice restrained. Nicholas felt every word he had rehearsed on the drive crumble. He had no right to be there, no right to ask her for anything. But he also knew that if he didn't do this, he would lose everything forever. "I'm sorry, Sophie," he said, his voice hoarse, taking a step toward her. I'm so sorry. I was an idiot. A fool. Victoria manipulated everything. She forged the documents. She made it all up to make you leave. I didn't see the truth." He held up a folder he had brought with him, filled with the evidence Thomas had gathered. "This is the truth. You're none of the things they said. I should never have doubted you. Please, Sophie, give me a chance to make it up to you. For Liam. He needs you." The mention of Liam seemed to soften her expression, but only slightly. Sophie crossed her arms, keeping her distance. He's been crying non-stop since you left," Nicholas confessed, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to do this without you. He needs the only person who truly cared for him." Sophie looked at him, pain filling her eyes. "It's not about Liam, Nicholas. It's about the fact that you believed the worst of me. You don't really know me if you could think I'd be capable of something like that." "You're right," Nicholas whispered. "I don't know you, but I want to. I want to get to know you. I want to learn from you. And I want you to know that there's nothing more important in my life now than you and Liam." Sophie looked down, fighting the emotions swirling within her. "I can't just come back because you're asking, Nicholas. I'm not your nanny or someone you can call back when things don't go your way." "I know. And I'm not asking you to come back as a nanny," he said, taking another step closer. "I want you to come back as my family, because that's what you are to Liam and to me. I want us to start over, but this time the right way, as a real family." The sincerity in his eyes made Sophie hesitate. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her voice trembled as she finally spoke. "Nicholas, I don't know if I can trust you again." Nicholas swallowed hard, nodding. "Then give me the chance to show you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a second chance." Sophie looked at him long and hard. Then, very slowly, she nodded. "For Liam, and only for him. I'll consider coming back." Nicholas felt a flicker of hope, and although he knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, he finally had something he hadn't had in weeks, a chance to fix what he had broken. Sophie's return to the Anderson mansion was not the happy ending Nicholas had imagined. Although she agreed to come back for Liam, she made it clear from the start that her return didn't mean she had forgiven him. The pain of betrayal was still there, pulsing like an open wound. Even though Nicholas had managed to expose Victoria's lies and prove Sophie's innocence, the damage was done, and winning back the trust of the only woman who had ever brought light into his life wouldn't be easy. When Sophie walked through the mansion's front doors again, holding Liam close to her chest, Nicholas felt a mix of relief and tension. It was as if the house itself let out a sigh of relief. The baby, seeing Sophie, had stopped crying almost immediately and now rested in her arms with a look of peace that Nicholas hadn't seen in weeks. But the way Sophie looked at him when he tried to approach, with a calm yet distant expression, made it clear that this was not a permanent return. She was here for Liam, not for him. "Thank you for coming back," Nicholas whispered, his voice filled with restrained emotion. Sophie didn't respond right away. Instead, she gently placed Liam in the crib that had been empty since her departure and carefully tucked him in with a soft, tender gesture. Finally, she turned to face Nicholas, her eyes locking onto his. "I didn't come back for you, Nicholas. I'm here because Liam needs me. But you and I—" She hesitated, her voice wavering slightly. "You and I still have a lot to work through." Nicholas nodded slowly, feeling as if each word she spoke was a tiny dagger. "I know," he murmured, "and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you I won't make the same mistake again." Sophie looked away for a moment, then nodded with a blend of acceptance and caution. "All right, but it'll be on my terms and in my own time." With those words, Sophie set a clear boundary between them. She spent the following weeks focused entirely on settling Liam. The baby, who had been so distressed and inconsolable since she left, began to calm down again with Sophie's presence. She cradled him with patience, murmured soothing words, and rocked him with a tenderness that Nicholas couldn't replicate, no matter how hard he tried. And each night, as Nicholas watched from a distance, he realized just how much he had missed these simple moments, the peace that Sophie brought into the house. But although Liam seemed to be recovering, the tension between Sophie and Nicholas remained. She was polite and courteous, but she kept an unbreachable wall between them. She avoided being alone with him, and when she wasn't busy with Liam, she retreated to the room that had been set aside for her. There were no more quiet conversations at the end of the day, no shared smiles when Liam did something mischievous. The bond they had started to build was broken, and Nicholas felt the weight of that loss like a chain around his heart. One day, Nicholas decided to take the first step in trying to mend what had been shattered. While Sophie was preparing breakfast for Liam in the kitchen, he entered slowly, keeping a respectful distance. In his hand, he held a small bouquet of white flowers, peonies, her favorites. He had heard her mention them casually once, during one of those long nights when they had talked about things that seemed trivial back then, but now felt like precious memories. "Sophie," he said softly, extending the bouquet toward her. "I know it doesn't mean much, but I wanted to thank you for coming back, for being here for Liam, and for giving me the chance to try to make things right." Sophie looked at the flowers for a long moment. Her eyes softened for just a second, but then her expression turned guarded again. Carefully, she took the bouquet and set it down on the counter without looking at him. "Thank you, Nicholas," she said in a neutral tone, "but I'm not ready for this." His words hit him like a slap in the face. She hadn't rejected him out of anger or resentment. It was worse. She had turned him down with that icy indifference that showed she wasn't willing to open up to him again. Nicholas swallowed the lump in his throat and stepped back. "I understand," he whispered, leaving the kitchen with a heavy heart. That small, failed attempt was just the first of many. Nicholas tried everything to show Sophie that he had changed. He reduced his work hours, began spending more time at home, and even delegated responsibilities at the company so he could be more present. He wanted to show her that he was no longer the man who valued only success and control, but someone willing to put family first. However, Sophie remained firm in her distance. She watched him with a look that held both caution and a hint of sadness, but she didn't take any steps toward him. One day, after a long, exhausting afternoon when Nicholas had unsuccessfully tried to make Liam laugh, Sophie approached him, thinking he had already gone to her room. Nicholas sat on the living room couch, his head bowed and his hands covering his face. Sophie watched him in silence for a long time, seeing the frustration and sadness etched in his slumped shoulders. When she finally dared to speak, her tone was softer than it had been in weeks. "I see you're trying, Nicholas," she said quietly. He looked up, surprised by the gentleness in her voice. "But I need more than just attempts. I need to know that you truly understand what happened. It's not just about showing me that you can change. It's about understanding why you didn't trust me, and why you let someone else manipulate you to destroy what we were building." Nicholas nodded slowly, his eyes locked on hers. "I know. I think about it every day since you left. But I don't know how to show you that I regret it, that I'd do anything to go back and change it." Sophie sighed and glanced down the hallway where Liam slept peacefully. She turned back to Nicholas with a serious expression. "There's one thing you can do," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "If you really want me to trust you again, you have to stop trying to control everything. You can't just make things go back to how they were just because you want it that way. You have to let time and your actions speak for themselves, and be willing to accept that I might decide to leave if that's what I feel is right." Nicholas felt those words cut through him like a blade. Letting her go, it was something he couldn't imagine, but he also knew she was right. His whole life, He had tried to control every aspect, plan every detail, but with Sophie and Liam he couldn't. He shouldn't. "I will," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "If that's what it takes for you to trust me again, I'll let you go if that's your decision." Sophie looked at him for a long moment, evaluating every line of his face, every unspoken word. Finally, she nodded slowly. "All right, let's start with that. But remember, Nicholas, I'm trusting you with the most precious thing I have right now, Liam's well-being. Don't fail me on this." That night, as Sophie retreated to her room and Nicholas stayed alone in the living room, a strange mixture of hope and fear swirled inside him. Sophie hadn't forgiven him, not really, but she had taken the first step toward rebuilding something, and he was willing to do whatever it took to regain her trust, even if it meant being prepared to lose her. Because this time, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about showing her that she was the true reason for his change. And as he sat in the dim light, staring at the small blanket Sophie had left on the couch, Nicholas made a silent promise. "I'll get it right this time, no matter how long it takes." The days turned into weeks, and slowly, the dynamic in the mansion began to shift. Sophie still kept her emotional distance from Nicholas, but the atmosphere was no longer charged with resentment. Nicholas's small gestures, making sure Sophie had time for herself, planning family activities, and being present for Liam's important moments, began to make tiny cracks in the walls she had built around herself. Liam, for his part, thrived under Sophie's attentive and loving care. His laughter filled the house, and his babbles were a constant source of joy for both adults. But the real change came on a rainy afternoon when Sophie watched as Nicholas tried unsuccessfully to teach Liam to take his first steps. "Come on, champ," Nicholas murmured, crouched on the floor as Liam, his little legs trembling, wobbled between the sofa and the coffee table. "Just one more step. I know you can do it." The baby swayed uncertainly and fell onto his knees, letting out a small whimper of frustration. Nicholas moved closer, but instead of picking him up, he clapped softly. "You did great, little one. Let's try again." Watching from the doorway, Sophie felt a tug at her heart. The Nicholas she once knew would never have shown such patience. He would have tried to correct the child's posture, to show him the right way to walk. But this Nicholas was willing to wait, to let Liam find his own pace. It was a small change, almost imperceptible, but it was enough for Sophie to take the next step. That same evening, after Liam had fallen asleep, Sophie remained in the living room instead of retreating to her room as usual. Nicholas, who was picking up Liam's toys, stopped when he saw her sitting on the couch, staring at the gentle flames crackling in the fireplace. "Would you like a cup of tea?" he asked cautiously. Sophie looked up, surprised by the offer, and then slowly nodded. "Yes, that would be nice, thank you." Nicholas headed to the kitchen and prepared the tea in silence, his thoughts swirling. Every small gesture, every opportunity to connect, felt like walking a tightrope. He didn't want to push her or invade her space, but the fact that Sophie was including him in something as simple as sharing a cup of tea felt like a small victory. When he returned, they sat together in comfortable silence, sipping the hot tea as the rain tapped gently against the windows. Sophie stared at the fire, lost in thought, and Nicholas wondered if he should say something, if he should try to start a conversation. But then, it was she who broke the silence. "Why have you changed so much, Nicholas?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the flames. Before, it was all about control, about power and perfection. But now, she turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Why this change? The question was direct, and Nicholas felt his heart race. He knew this was a crucial moment, an opportunity to show Sophie that his transformation was genuine. "Because I realized I was living a life that had no meaning," he answered slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Everything I did was about meeting expectations, maintaining an image, never disappointing others. I thought having success, money and power would make me happy. But everything changed the day I met Liam. He paused, lowering his gaze to the cup in his hands. When I held that tiny life in my arms, I understood what really mattered. He is a chance for redemption for me. He's the last connection I have to Megan, the only real family I have left. And then, you came along. Sophie looked at him intently, her lips parted slightly. Nicholas took a deep breath before continuing. When I met you, Sophie, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine kindness. Someone who wasn't interested in my money, my power, or what I could offer you. All you cared about was taking care of that little boy. And each day that passed, I realized that you weren't just caring for Liam. You were teaching me, showing me how to be a better person. When Victoria manipulated the situation and I pushed you away, it felt like losing something invaluable, like losing my compass. Since then, everything I've done is to show you that I learned the lesson, that I'm willing to become someone worthy of the trust you placed in me from the beginning. Sophie remained silent for a long moment, processing his words. Finally, she nodded slowly, as if admitting something to herself. It's true that you've changed, she said quietly. But Nicholas, the way you hurt me, the way you pushed me aside when I needed you the most. Her voice broke slightly. It still hurts. Nicholas felt a sharp pain in his chest, but nodded, accepting her pain. I know, and I can't change what happened. All I can do is promise you that I'll never let anyone hurt you again, that I'll never doubt you again. Tears gathered in Sophie's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, regaining her composure. Slowly, she reached out and placed her hand over Nicholas's. It was a brief touch, almost imperceptible, but for him, it meant the world. I want to believe you, she murmured, her voice trembling. I want to believe that all of this is real, but you need to be patient with me. I can't just forget what happened. Nicholas gently clasped her hand, his fingers trembling slightly at the contact. I don't want you to forget. I want you to see how hard I work every day to show you I'm not the man who betrayed you. I want you to see that I'm here for you, for Liam, and for what we can become together. Sophie looked at him, weighing his words once more. Then, slowly, she withdrew her hand. Not in rejection, but with a kind of resolution. All right, she said softly. Then let's try. But don't misunderstand, Nicholas. I'm here to see who you really are. If you ever make me doubt again, this will be the last time you see me. Nicholas nodded, his heart pounding. I understand, he replied firmly. I won't fail you again. Over the next few weeks, Nicholas and Sophie began to spend more time together. At first, it was because of Liam, walks in the park, afternoons in the playroom, baths and bedtime stories. But gradually, things started to change. Sophie began to relax around him. Sometimes, she found herself laughing at a silly comment or joke Nicholas made to entertain Liam. Other times, she would watch him when she thought he wasn't aware. And Nicholas, for his part, didn't stop trying. He respected every boundary Sophie set, every distance she maintained, and never tried to push her. Instead, he supported her in everything she did, giving her the space she needed, and showing with every gesture and every word that he was committed to doing things right. One night, as the three of them were curled up on the couch, watching a children's movie, Nicholas felt something shift. Sophie leaned slightly against his shoulder, almost unconsciously, and he sat completely still, afraid to move and break the spell. But when the movie ended, she didn't pull away immediately. She just stayed there, with Liam asleep in her lap and her eyes fixed on the screen. Nicholas, she whispered softly, her eyes closed. Yes? She took a deep breath, her body relaxing a little more. "Thank you for not giving up." Nicholas felt a warm and powerful sensation spread through his chest. He gently squeezed Sophie's hand and closed his eyes. "I would never give up on you, Sophie. Never." And for the first time, he felt that maybe she was finally beginning to believe him. The weeks continued to pass, and the distance that had once separated Nicholas and Sophie began to dissolve. There was no longer that same silent tension between them, nor the emotional walls that had kept them apart. Now, they shared more than just the responsibility of caring for Liam. They shared moments, smiles, and gradually, they started building something deeper. Something they both longed for, even though neither dared to name it. Nicholas didn't want to do anything that could jeopardize this progress. Every step he took, every word he said, was solely aimed at gaining more of Sophie's trust. But no matter how carefully he tried to plan everything, life always had a way of shattering even the best-laid plans. One afternoon, as the soft sunlight streamed through the living room curtains and Liam's laughter echoed like a melody of hope throughout the mansion, a sharp knock on the front door shattered the harmony. Nicholas, who was in the garden with Liam and Sophie, frowned and headed toward the door, holding the baby in his arms. "I'm not expecting anyone," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. When he opened the door, the air seemed to turn icy all of a sudden. Standing on the threshold was Victoria. Her posture, as impeccable as always, radiated a mix of coldness and determination. Her lips curled into a sharp smile, and her eyes scanned Nicholas with an intensity he hadn't seen in her for a long time. "Hello, Nicholas," she said softly, her voice dripping with hidden venom. "Aren't you going to invite me in?" Nicholas's heart skipped a beat. Sophie, who had followed Nicholas to the door, froze when she saw Victoria standing there. Her name escaped Sophie's lips in a whisper, as if she were seeing a ghost come back to life. "Victoria!" Sophie stared at her, a mix of surprise and caution on her face. Liam, oblivious to the tension, reached his tiny hands toward Nicholas, babbling curiously. Nicholas felt his body tense as he instinctively held Liam closer, shielding him. He looked at Victoria, trying to maintain his composure. "You have no business being here," he said quietly. "I made sure to sever all ties between us after what you did. I don't know why you've come, but you're not welcome." Victoria feigned a hurt expression, though the falseness of her act was clear. She stepped inside without waiting for his invitation and paused in the foyer, her gaze roaming around the house as if she were the rightful owner. "Oh, come on, Nicholas. Don't be so harsh. After all, we shared so many moments together. I just couldn't stand by and watch you ruin your life. Again." Sophie stepped forward slowly, keeping her gaze locked on Victoria. "What do you want, Victoria?" she asked, her voice firm but controlled. Victoria looked at her, and a cold smile spread across her face. "What do I want? I simply want to do the right thing." She turned to Nicholas, her smile growing sharper and more sinister. "I came here to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life." Nicholas felt anger rise within him. He couldn't believe that after all the damage she had caused, Victoria still had the audacity to show up and act as if she were some sort of savior. "The only thing you did was destroy our lives," he spat, his voice thick with resentment. "You lied to me, manipulated everyone around you, and nearly destroyed the only person who truly cares about Liam." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't back down. "Oh, really? Is that what you think?" She lifted a folder she had brought with her and dropped it with a sharp thud onto the table in the foyer. "Because there are things you don't know, Nicholas. Things I haven't shared until now." Nicholas looked at the folder suspiciously. Was this another trick? Before he could move, Sophie stepped forward and picked it up, her hands trembling. Her eyes scanned the pages quickly, and Nicholas watched as her face turned paler with each word she read. What does this mean?" Sophie asked, her voice breaking. Victoria's smile widened slowly, like a cat that had just caught its prey. "It means that our dear Nicholas hasn't been completely honest with you." She turned toward him, her eyes glittering with satisfaction. "It seems our charming businessman never bothered to tell you all the details of Megan's will." Nicholas felt his stomach drop. He remembered Megan's will clearly, but what was Victoria insinuating? "Megan included a clause in her will," Victoria continued, her voice sing-song and malicious. "It stated that if you were ever unable to care for her child for any reason, he was to be placed under the guardianship of another family, and not just any family, the Blackwell family." Nicholas's heart stopped. He looked at Sophie, who was staring back at him with wide eyes, filled with questions and pain. He began, his voice trembling. "I didn't know. I never knew." Victoria let out a bitter laugh. "Of course you knew," Victoria sneered, lifting her chin triumphantly. "But you chose to ignore it, thinking you could handle everything like always." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "But this time, things are different, Nicholas. If I can't have you, I'll make sure that at least Liam is with the right family. I've already started the legal process to claim custody. I was just waiting for you to slip up. And when the nanny left last time, it was the perfect opportunity to start the paperwork." Nicholas felt rage boil up inside him. The thought that Victoria could use her power and influence to take Liam away from him was infuriating. "You have no right to do this, Victoria. You have no connection to him." "Oh, but I do," she whispered, a sly smile spreading across her lips. "The clause in Megan's will states that the Blackwell family is the first in line if you fail as a guardian. And after what you did, doubting Sophie and almost breaking her, the lawyers believe there's a solid case for proving that you're unfit to care for a child." Sophie felt her legs weaken. Could this really be true? Could they lose Liam? She turned to Nicholas, her eyes filled with a desperation he had never seen before. "Tell me this isn't true," she murmured. Nicholas stepped closer, raising his hands in a pleading gesture. "Sophie, I swear I didn't know any of this. I never wanted her to have any control over Liam. Everything I've done for you and him." Victoria let out a dramatic sigh. "And look at you two now, pleading with each other." She glanced at Nicholas with a cold, mocking smile. "But this isn't a negotiation, Nicholas. I've already made my move. Don't worry. Liam will have a wonderful life with me and my family. But as for you..." She smiled icily. "I promise you'll regret choosing this simple nanny over me." Nicholas felt his world crumble around him. He looked at Sophie, who was holding Liam tightly, and a surge of determination filled him. "I won't let you take him," he said, his voice hard and trembling with fury. "No matter what it costs, I won't let you destroy this family." Victoria eyed him thoughtfully for a moment, then with a final smirk, turned toward the door. "We'll see, Nicholas. We'll see if you're really capable of protecting what you claim to value so much." And with one elegant movement, she left, leaving Nicholas and Sophie in a storm of anguish, pain, and confusion. The future of Liam, their little boy, hung by a thread, and the past Nicholas had chosen to ignore was on the verge of destroying everything they had tried to rebuild. Victoria's visit changed everything. In the weeks that followed, the Anderson mansion turned into a battleground. Lawyers from both sides came and went constantly, phones rang off the hook, and legal meetings dragged on late into the night. Victoria had declared war, and her goal was clear: to take Liam away and shatter what remained of the bond between Sophie and Nicholas. News of the custody battle soon hit the media, and soon sensational headlines filled the tabloids. The Anderson scandal, a battle for the heir's custody. The ex-fiancée versus the businessman, who will get the child. Rumors about Nicholas's instability and the supposed manipulations by Sophie began to circulate again. Everything Victoria had schemed from the beginning was unfolding, and the odds seemed more and more in her favor. But Nicholas didn't give up. Despite pressure from his own legal team and concerns from his company's shareholders, he stood his ground. However, the strain was taking its toll on everyone. The tension in the mansion was palpable. Liam, who had once been a happy and calm child, became restless and difficult to soothe. Sophie tried to stay strong, but Nicholas could see how the situation was wearing her down day by day. One afternoon, while Nicholas was meeting with his lead attorney in the study, Sophie entered unexpectedly. Her face was pale and her eyes shone with determination. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly. Nicholas dismissed his lawyer with a wave and turned to her, his stomach churning. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice laced with worry. Sophie took a deep breath, as if she needed to summon all her strength for what she was about to say. "I'm going to testify for you," she announced, her voice steady. Nicholas blinked, stunned. "What? Sophie, no! You can't! Victoria has all that fabricated garbage about you. She'll use it to discredit you." "I know," Sophie replied without hesitation, "but I have to do it. I can't let Victoria get away with this. I can't let her take Liam." "Sophie," Nicholas whispered, stepping closer. "I don't want you to put yourself in that position. If you testify, she could destroy you. I don't want you to get hurt because of me." She met his gaze directly, with an intensity he had never seen in her before. "This isn't about you, Nicholas. It's about Liam. He's all that matters." Her voice wavered slightly, but she remained resolute. "If I don't do this, if I don't fight for him, then I'll never forgive myself. Not you, and certainly not me." Nicholas felt his chest tighten. He knew Sophie was putting everything she had rebuilt in her life on the line, her reputation, her dignity, and everything she cared about. But he also knew she was right. They couldn't let Victoria win. For the first time in weeks, he felt a tiny spark of hope. "Thank you, Sophie," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "I don't know what I would do without you." Sophie gave a faint smile, but her eyes still reflected the worry and fear they both felt. "This isn't about you, Nicholas. It's about Liam. And it's about me, too. I'm not going to run away anymore." The day of the trial arrived quickly. Nicholas and Sophie walked into the courthouse together, surrounded by a swarm of reporters and flashing cameras. Nicholas stayed close beside Sophie, shielding her with his presence while holding Liam's tiny hand tightly. The child, oblivious to the chaos around them, clutched his teddy bear, watching the commotion with innocent curiosity. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Victoria sat on the opposite side of the room, wearing a smug smile and radiating an air of anticipated victory. Her team of lawyers whispered to her, but her eyes never left Sophie and Nicholas, like a hawk observing its prey. When Sophie took the stand, Nicholas felt his heart race. His hands clenched until his knuckles turned white as he watched her every move and listened to every word she spoke. Sophie began speaking calmly, telling her story, how she had arrived at the mansion, how she had met Liam, and how she had always tried to protect him. Victoria's lawyers interrupted her several times, trying to trip her up with misleading questions and presenting the falsified reports that Victoria had created to discredit her. "Is it true that you were fired from your previous job for negligence?" one of the lawyers asked sternly, holding up one of the fabricated documents. Sophie took a deep breath and remained composed. "No, it is not," she replied firmly. "Those documents are falsified. I have never been fired for negligence. In fact, if you review my actual record, you'll see that I have always worked to help others, especially children." She turned to the judge, her eyes filled with determination. "This isn't about me. This is about a child who lost his mother and is now being used as a pawn in a personal feud. Liam deserves better. He deserves a family that will love and protect him, not one that uses him as a trophy." The judge looked at her thoughtfully, and Nicholas felt the tension in the room intensify. But Sophie didn't stop. "Liam needs stability, love, and security," she continued softly. "And I know Nicholas can give that to him. He's changed, and he did it for him. Not for me, not for anyone else, but because he understands what it means to be responsible for someone else. He's not perfect, but nobody is. What matters is that he's willing to fight for his nephew, and I'm willing to stand by his side." Victoria scoffed disdainfully, but the judge ignored her. There was a long silence in the room, and finally the judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Miss Collins. You may step down." When Sophie returned to her seat, Nicholas looked at her with eyes full of gratitude and emotion. She didn't say anything, just gave him a small nod. They both knew they had done everything they could. Now, all they could do was wait. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Both sides presented their closing arguments, and finally, the judge left to deliberate. Time seemed to stand still. Nicholas felt as if he couldn't breathe, as if everything he loved was hanging by a thread. Sophie sat beside him, her hands trembling and her eyes closed, whispering something softly like a silent prayer. Then the judge returned. "After reviewing the evidence presented and hearing from all parties involved, I have reached a conclusion," he announced solemnly, looking at each of them in turn. "Ms. Victoria Blackwell has attempted to manipulate this process inappropriately and presented false evidence to discredit Miss Collins. Therefore, her petition for custody is denied immediately." Victoria let out a strangled gasp, but the judge ignored her. "The child, Liam Anderson, will remain in the custody of his uncle, Nicholas Anderson. Additionally, the court recommends continued monitoring to ensure that the family environment remains suitable for the child's well-being." Nicholas felt his entire body relax, as if an enormous weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Sophie let out a shaky breath and covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. They had won. As they stepped outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters shouting questions, Nicholas turned to Sophie and, for the first time in a long while, smiled genuinely. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice breaking. "Thank you for everything." Sophie looked at him, her eyes still filled with tears, and shook her head. "Don't thank me, Nicholas. This was all for Liam. And for you. For the man I know you can become." He nodded, feeling that words could never fully express what he felt. "So," he whispered, his voice full of hope, "does this mean we could try for real? Be a family?" Sophie looked at him for a long moment, weighing every word. And then, very slowly, she smiled. "Yes, Nicholas, let's try." And as they walked toward the car together, with Liam laughing between them, they knew that they had finally found what they had been searching for all along, a place to call home and a future to build together as a true family. And so, this incredible story filled with love, redemption and sacrifice comes to an end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss more stories like this, where we explore the limits of love, loyalty, and the strength of family. Remember, sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that define who we are and the kind of people we become. What would you do in a situation like this? Let us know in the comments. See you in the next story, where we'll continue to discover together the power of human emotions. See you soon.